All right, you're all set, John.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everybody. Today is Wednesday, April 28th. It is 4 p.m. and this is the Town Council Finance Committee meeting to review our different budget proposals. And today we're going to review the police department, fire department, school department. So I'll call this meeting to order. And Colette, would you help me take the roll call?
Certainly. Councillor Gleistein?
Here.
Councillor Anderson?
Here.
Councillor Clucci?
Here.
Thank you.
And the next order of business is to approve minutes from April 21st. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. No discussion, Colette?
Councillor Clucci?
Yes.
Councillor Gleistein?
Yes.
Councillor Anderson?
Yes.
Motion passes.
And now we get to move into the heart of the meeting. And I noticed that Chief Moulton may have stepped aside for the moment. Our first topic to review is, and he's coming back now, is the police department. Tom, I don't know if you want to give an introduction.
No, I just would take note that Robbie was laughing and smiling earlier. I think that has something to do with this being his last budget time, but I may be off on that. No, I think I'll cede my time to the chief.
Thank you very much. Well, first off, I'd like to thank you very much for having this opportunity to talk about our budget. It's always a great opportunity for us to explain what's important to us and let the finance committee know what and council know what we're proposing, what our plans are for the next year. And as Tom said, and I know you all are aware, I am retiring effective July 3rd and won't be here for any of this budget that you'll be looking at today. So having said that, I have Deputy Chief Dave Grover, Deputy Chief John O'Malley, and Lieutenant Tim Barker, who have done really the yeoman's work on this budget. And they're going to be the ones that are going to be living through the results of it. And so this is a little bit different for me. For the past 20 something years, I've sat at the head of the table here, and tonight I plan on turning this over and heckling from the back row. So Dave Grover was unfortunate enough to draw the short straw, and he will be making our presentation, and we will all be available here for any questions that you might have after the presentation. So I'd like to turn it over to Dave.
Good afternoon, everyone. As the chief said, thank you very much for this opportunity to discuss our budget or our proposed budget with you this afternoon. We can move to the next slide. Our first slide's an overview of what our budget here at the police department is made up of. The administration part of the budget includes our administrative staff, both sworn and civilian staff, and any of the expenses that go with those positions, as well as our social services navigator position is also included in administration. Next on that list is patrol. Patrol actually includes all of our sworn positions for the police department. And any of the funding that is utilized for those positions. Our communications portion of the budget is for our dispatch center, the people that work in the center. Reserve officers section of the budget covers our part-time personnel. We have part-time sworn officers who assist us both in seasonal and specialty duties for the department. Marine Resources is our program that includes our full-time Marine Resource Officer, as well as funding for part-time coverage during our busy summer season. It also includes funds for the program itself and for the services that are provided both to the town of Scarborough and the town of Cape Elizabeth. Our animal control program funds our full-time animal control officer and any of the expenses that go along with that position. And that position is providing service to Scarborough and also to the city of Westbrook at this time. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. Fire police is our fire police unit that is an on-call funded unit, and those personnel respond to emergency and large event scenes. They assist with public safety and directing traffic at those scenes. Next slide. Restoration costs. Our restoration costs in the budget come from 3 different areas: training, equipment, and supplies. Our training funds that we are able to cut from last year's budget come from our administrative, patrol, dispatch, reserve officer, and marine resource areas of our budget. Our equipment includes funds that were taken from our firearms, vest replacement, taser, radar, marine resource, and reserve officer areas of our budget. And our supplies were from dispatch, police, and marine resources. And there was a total of $18,400 in those funds. I also just wanted to mention that we were able to save some money in that budget by leaving some vacant positions vacant for an extended period of time, but they aren't restoration costs. The cost for those things stayed in our budget. Next slide. New initiatives. We have one new initiative, and that's a proposed communications manager position. We currently have 9 dispatchers in our dispatch center and 4 lead dispatchers. Our lead dispatchers are also working dispatchers, and they supervise at the same time as well as dispatching for services. And our lead dispatchers report through our police lieutenant in the department. The new position of the communications manager position that we're proposing would be responsible for the management of the personnel and the resources of our dispatch center. This person would coordinate the services provided to Scarborough and Old Orchard as far as dispatching, and also to Buxton for our answering of 911 calls that we transfer to those to Buxton. And that also includes that if there is emergency medical or emergency fire dispatching, that we provide that service as well for Buxton. We've tried to standardize as much as possible how we provide service to all 3 communities. But even with that, there are differences between each of the communities and each of the departments that the dispatch center provides service for. And that is a job as far as making sure that we're providing the highest level of quality of service to not only our own citizens here in town, but also to those other communities. This also includes with this position that the state has requirements, especially when it comes to emergency medical dispatching, emergency fire dispatching, as far as standardization and quality assurance requirements that we need to fulfill with this position or this person would be making sure that those things are completed. We also have been approached by other communities for us to consider providing dispatch services. And the person in this position would be tasked with reviewing those proposals, making sure that the quality of service that we provide currently wouldn't diminish, and that we'd be able to enhance that in a cost-effective way. Next slide, please. Opportunities to move towards our budget goal. One of the things that I wanted to mention is that we are constantly looking for ways to partner and share services. One of the things we've tried to take advantage of as much as possible is the idea of that we are not in competition with other agencies, and being able to share things as well as partner, especially on things that are not needed day in and day out, or where it makes the most sense to be able to do that. And that what some of the examples of that are, one of the things that I also wanted to mention is that there's revenue that we have done a test project with the city of Westbrook in this current year, as far as providing their animal control services. And they are going to be contracting with us for this 2022 budget. And we will be receiving revenue that's not already noted in our revenue lines in the amount of $38,200 to provide that service. The other thing, as far as moving towards our budget goal, is that we have potential additional revenue if that new initiative with the communications manager was to be approved. Lordship has been asked to consider and is considering funding a third of that position of $32,300, which would also be revenue in our budget. I know that we have to account for our expenditures separately and our revenue, but those two revenue items, if they were to come to fruition, actually equal 1% of our budget. Right now, our expenditures are at an increase of 5.2%. And this would account for 1% of that 5.2%, or a reduction as far as the net. The potentials for other dispatch partners in the center are things that we've had informal discussions about in the past with other communities, but we feel that if this position was in place, we'd be in a much better position to not only have those discussions, but do the work to make sure that every piece of the situation makes sense for all of the parties involved. The last thing I wanted to mention, as far as the adjustment, or was an adjustment to our fee schedule, both for hiring officers, for vendors that hire cruisers, and then also for our fingerprinting fees. The difficulty as far as that with our budget goal and being specific is that that depends on the demands in the coming year and how much revenue that will or won't produce for us. Next slide, please. Budget cut impacts when it comes to our training opportunities for our staff. I just wanted to mention that our original appropriation to our budget for our training and equipment and our supplies was not at a place where there was any room as far as overfunding. That the money, especially for those things, is especially important when it comes to training and equipment. We're constantly and closely following the discussions that are taking place at the national level and at the state level for police reform, and also the needs as things change. I think we've always prided ourselves on being ahead of the curve when it comes to those areas, and feel that it's important now more than ever to make sure that we stay in that position. Our opportunities for training when it comes to things like liability, the first things that are looked at are whether our staff has been properly trained, properly equipped, and then after that, properly supervised when we're being scrutinized when it comes to liability in different situations that we're involved in. The training, we have done things to certainly try to make our training as effective as possible. A lot of our mandatory training that's required of our police officers for certification, we're able to get now through online training. We've utilized 2 different companies now in the years that we've done this. And we found a more effective company and cost-effective company in the state more recently. And then we are also have purchased a software package for our policies where we can produce our policies online, provide them to our staff for review as well as for comment if they're draft policies or policies that are up for changes, get feedback, reproduce the final draft of the policy and put it out for review. Next slide, please. I think that includes the formal presentation. If there are any questions or comments, I can answer those or one of the other staff here.
Yeah, sorry, thank you for that. I'm experiencing technical difficulties, so I'm on the phone trying to get reconnected, but I'm going to pass it to Betsy and John to see if you can get to their questions first.
So I had a question on the QA reviews of is that QA reviews of 911 calls, or is that across all public safety, or is that police calls? Is that EMS calls, or and does that involve a training component where there's training throughout the process of the QA review, or is it strictly something that you go through that the state requires?
The QA is for calls, 911 calls for emergency medical dispatching and emergency fire dispatching, because there's a standardized script to the dispatching, and then also required questions of the dispatcher to ask. The QA process, we have staff that are trained to review the recordings of those calls to make sure, to ensure the quality of the dispatching, and then the state audits that QA process.
Have you ever looked at a third party to do that QA review of the EMS calls?
I know that we haven't. I don't know if the state allows for it or not.
May not. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Again, just with that new position that you've requested, can you again talk a little bit about what are the duties that this position is going to perform differently than what the current lieutenants are doing that are currently managing it?
I think one of the first things is to have a communications professional that is working with the dispatch center. Our police lieutenant's done an excellent job, as is the sergeants who have been assigned at a collateral duty. But the job has become more and more specialized over the years. We've actually had somebody in that position in the past. The problem has been with staffing levels and budget constraints. The person ends up needing to function as a dispatcher as well, either a significant amount of the time or all of the time. And when it comes to managing things as far as budget and personnel and scheduling, working with other agencies, meeting with them to make sure that we're providing the level of service, as well as our own department here in town, that it becomes very difficult to do that with the way that things are currently configured. With this position, the way we envision it is to do something very similar to what we've tried to do in the past, but also make sure that that person has the availability. We do feel confident now that our center is staffed well enough to provide dispatch service with this position, and this person could truly act as that manager for the center.
Do you see them also actually having to take on dispatch services as well? Just given what you said earlier about how the demand has grown. So do you see them also having to do that, or are they going to be able to be strictly dedicated to like the management functions that you just shared?
I think our vision is to have somebody who is dedicated to those management functions. We've seen similar in our supervision in the police department, that things like scheduling, that it's more effective to have somebody who's not right in that schedule to be creating and reviewing the schedule for not only quality, but the making decisions on an ongoing basis about the scheduling. And then some of the things as far as managing the center as well. I think our vision would be that if we were able to attain this position, that the person, if we needed additional staffing in dispatch at some point, that we would look for that additional staffing. But we would also be exploring at the same time. We feel very comfortable at this point in time. We have sufficient staffing. And I think if we were looking for additional staffing, the two things I can foresee is the continued growth of the town here in Scarborough, or if we were to take on other partners. And if there were growth in the other communities, we would expect that those communities would share in the expenses as well.
Great, thank you. Those are the only questions I had.
Hey, David, can you talk me through how you came up with a third of the costs going or being proposed to be picked up by Old Orchard and the rest by us? And I think not by Buxton, right?
Correct. And the reason for that is that the service that we provide to Buxton is different than the service that we provide to Old Orchard. Old Orchard, we provide complete dispatch services to them, very similar to or the same as what we do here in town. Where Buxton still maintains their own dispatch center, we answer those 911 calls and potentially EMD or EFD them, but then we transfer them to Buxton's dispatch center. The third came from looking at population as well as calls for service and what we do provide. And we actually do review that on an ongoing basis as far as what the demand is on the center that comes from, and we do it the best we can based on things that we can measure. The demand on the center from here in town as it compared to the demand on the center from Old Orchard Beach.
Okay. John and Betsy, go ahead.
Yeah. Do you have and not for today, but do you have available a breakdown of, cost per call and how it compares to like Cumberland County dispatch service?
What do you mean by cost per call?
Well, so stats so you must have stats on all dispatch calls kind of broken down by category, what they are. And so if we took all the calls that you receive dispatch wise and then divided out by the cost of dispatch, what the dispatch is, have you ever looked at what it's costing us per call?
I think that's something we could do. I'm not sure that we've done that in the past. I think one of the challenges is there are certain types of calls that are much more labor intensive than other calls. We certainly could figure that out numbers wise as far as the number of calls we receive, including
per dispatch minute or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and you may have provided this already and I just missed it because there's a lot of information about a lot of topics, but so you must have like a regular dispatch report that you look at quarterly or monthly or something like that. Is that something that you could forward on about the past few years, say 19 and forward, about the number of the calls and the categories and that types of things?
Yep.
Okay, that would be great.
Just if I could, if the suggestion is, and it's a very good question because there is actually a ready-made option that we could consider, and we've done it at least twice during my tenure, which is Cumberland County. They provide dispatch services for a number of Cumberland County communities. We've considered that in depth twice during my tenure. Most recently, we did a check-in with the council when we were designing this new public safety building, because that was an opportunity for us to consider whether we need to provide for that service, in our operation or not. And the council at the time emphatically said they want to keep it. And so we've made significant investment in terms of space. Frankly, dispatch, for good reason, occupies some of the most prominent real estate in that building. And we've made serious investments in a communications tower, and also certainly all the technology to help support them. So it's an interesting exercise, but I think we've frankly made some major financial commitments that we're going to keep this operation within our organization for at least the near term.
Yeah, that makes sense. But always comparing to, how it's going in other, other areas. I mean, you could, compare to Portland or compare to South Portland, probably run their own. So just to kind of see, what the costs look like. But yeah, we've definitely made a significant advantage. But Cumberland County is pretty fortunate to have a pretty good option, pretty good multiple options, I guess. And it kind of sounds like we're becoming, when people are, Buxton's not in Cumberland County and neither is OB. So I don't know if they have a similar option in the counties they're in, but they apparently are looking more towards us, which is pretty interesting. So.
David, I'm wondering if you can speak. I apologize if I missed this earlier, but to the impact of the pandemic on your staff workload and how morale is doing. How are you guys pulling through it?
Yeah. It's been interesting, as it has for all of us, I'm sure. We've been made adjustments. I think one of the advantages that we have is that, as you know, we're responsible to respond to calls that we can't predict. I think that helped us as far as being able to adjust on the fly to the changes that we needed to make. It has definitely been a year of constant, not huge adjustments, but constant tweaks to how we're doing business, and still be able to provide the level of service that we have always tried to provide to the citizens. I think probably some of the big things are more time on the phone with citizens and in this type of format than the face-to-face contact that we used to have. I think that we've made it work, but it isn't the same as it is for anybody. There are definitely situations that we become involved in that are that having that face-to-face contact and even face-to-face contact without a mask would be easier. We've had challenges like, you may know it right now, we have Cumberland County Jail and the York County Jail, Two Bridges Jail, both not accepting new prisoners, challenges with the court system, but we've been able to just keep making those adjustments so far. And we're hopefully all looking at the other end of this.
I have another question for you. Again, I would think that there's a close correlation between the demand in the dispatch and the demand for other services. So why are we not seeing an increase in requests for other patrol services? Like, do you feel like, again, just by freeing up the lieutenant, that you're meeting whatever needs are met for the rest of the police force, or are we in good shape right now and we're okay, at least from that angle?
We actually did initially make proposal for a dispatch and a police officer position. I think that need is still there. I think what we saw was that there was the benefit of as you mentioned, the communications manager, is that it not only provides our most pressing need, which is that position, but the police lieutenant is working with our 4 lead supervisors right now, and he's also working with 7 sergeants. And this also would obviously give him some ability to refocus efforts that are going towards dispatch right now.
And John, if I could, we've been able to make fairly steady investments in the patrol side through the years, not as fast as I think some would like, but we have made investments I guess I'll take responsibility. They did make a request for an additional patrol officer. I encourage them to prioritize their investment, and this is the one that they saw most pressing.
I had another question. Speaking of COVID, the state made some changes related to housing, related to shelters, and opened up 2 shelters pretty close together on the border, our border between Scarborough and South Portland, there at Spring Street. Have we seen an increase in calls in that area of town, right around the overpass, or has that not happened? And if we have, has the state responded to that?
I know that we have seen an increase. I know we're also in actually the process of compiling information right now for, I believe, a meeting that's coming up in the beginning of May.
Yeah, Betsy, this matter is on the council agenda for next Wednesday. So I believe you'll get a full report from Maine Housing and Preble Street on that operation, how it's gone, and what it looks like going forward. So part of that is the police department's involvement so far.
So, and the potential for an additional patrol, what's the impact of not funding that?
I think certainly that there's a need there for additional staffing, but we also recognize the budget constraints that you're working in. And I think the prioritization was the best prioritization as far as the communications manager, and not only the position for the department itself, but also the revenue and the ability to potentially partially fund that position through revenue.
Okay, thank you.
John, I think you're on mute if you were trying to talk.
So I'm listening to you on my phone and watching you on my computer. This is about the biggest technical challenge I've had in a while. But it sounds like you can hear me now. So I was saying thank you, David. And I assume that John and Betsy, you don't have any other questions for the police department. Okay, that's been very informative. I appreciate you joining us and sharing your priorities. And if we have any follow-up questions, we'll be sure to reach back out, of course. Is Chief Thurlow with? I'm sorry, Betsy?
Saying great job.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's see here. Yeah, I'm going to promote Chief Thurlow to a panelist, as well as, I believe, Deputy Chief Kindlein.
Excellent. I'm in a position, I'm afraid to hang up my phone because I don't know what's going to happen.
All right. Chief.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you.
So now we're moving to our second review session, which is the fire department. And we have Chief Thurlow and Rich Kindlein joining us. Tom, I don't know if you want to give any intro for this budget.
I don't think so. I think their materials are pretty thorough, and they've got a fairly direct presentation to make to you, and I think it's best to let them speak.
Sounds good. Take it away, guys.
Great. Well, once again, thank you very much for this opportunity. It's always an important process in the budget debate, and we're here to answer any questions that you have. And I'll run through this presentation real quick, and then certainly Rich and I are both available to answer any questions afterwards. Oops, I think there's one before that.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Yep.
So similar to the police department, our budget is made up of 6 different subsections. So the administrative budget covers pretty much the operation of the back office stuff. It includes my salary, the administrative assistants, all of our utilities and repairs and maintenance and all those types of costs. We break out the emergency medical services budget. The reason for that is to try to capture those costs As you know, we bill for our emergency medical services. The theory there is that taxes, provide part of the support for an emergency medical service in your fire department, but that we ought to try to recoup some of the costs for providing EMS service from the insurance companies that most folks have coverage with. So we also bill for services, and by separating EMS out into its own sub-budget, it allows us to track those expenses and costs. So anything outside of the operation of the ambulance or the staffing of the ambulances under the EMS budget, we capture in the suppression budget, which includes our day firefighter per diem program and the supervisors that aren't actually on an ambulance providing direct EMS service. Although our suppression folks are all cross-trained and they deliver both fire and EMS services all day long, we just track those in a separate budget line so that the two folks that are staffing the ambulances are the ones that we cover in the EMS budget. We have a smaller emergency management budget where we track some part-time help and some supplies. The fire prevention office has its own separate budget, and then certainly the capital improvements budget where our projects and programs are. So the big story for the fire department is really the restoration costs. That's where the bulk of the increase in our budget request is this year. Staffing amounts to a total of 214,000, almost 500. And there's three things that make up this amount, and these were cuts that were made last year. The first one is towards the end of the budget process, there was a 12-hour day firefighter position cut 7 days a week. So that equates to $107,351 to restore those 12 hours per day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. The second line item is the full cost of the two new firefighter EMTs, career firefighters, that were approved in this current year budget, but weren't scheduled to start until April 1st. So we're picking up 9 months of stranded costs that weren't in this year's budget next year to cover those employees that have already been hired and are already on the job, but were delayed in their implementation last year as a budget savings decision. And then the third cost that we're picking up under staffing is a little over $8,500, and that was the furlough savings from our two administrative assistants that went on the furlough program in the early part of this current fiscal year. Those are the stranded costs that we need to pick up for their full coverage this year. Equipment, there's $9,750 worth of new equipment purchases throughout the different sub-budgets, and there's about $3,500 in training, as well as a little over $14,000 in supplies, maintenance, and other costs across our budget that were cut last year during the budget process. So our total restoration request in the FY22 budget is $242,390. And I made a note at the bottom there, we didn't include all of the stranded or restoration costs from last year. There were a few lines, for example, travel and training, where we know that things aren't going to get back to normal. So we still didn't restore travel for a national conference and some of the things that we have traditionally done in the past. But I think the real headline is the last bullet. If you were to take these restoration costs out, we really went through every budget line in the department and tried to minimize increases wherever we could. And without these restoration costs, we'd be looking at $132,558 increase, or about a 2.3% increase. The budget is really driven by restoring our costs. There are two new initiatives in our budget. In addition to the restoration of about $4,500 in FY21 cuts to our fire gear replacement line, I have asked for an additional 13,500, and this has been a long-term goal. Structural firefighting gear is extremely expensive. It's almost $2,000 a set. What we've tried to do is, instead of budgeting a large capital improvement item every few years to do that, is to stop bonding those and try to get that into a operational expense line where we buy a few sets every year. Last year we had to make a reduction. We hired some new people. We've actually overspent that line significantly. So one of our new initiatives is to get this to a level where we can buy a few sets. These have to be custom fit to each employee to meet the NFPA safety standards. And this is one of those items that we think we should move forward with. The second new initiative that we've tried to build in is about $17,472. And this is for a pay shift differential within one of our per diem shifts. So it's not a new per diem shift. It's just a pay differential for one of the existing shifts that we have here at the Public Safety Building. Our per diem program really started as a program to help staff the stations when the call members weren't available to get the trucks out with a driver to start with. And it was more fire suppression centric. What we found is that a lot of the folks that we hire for those jobs, recruitment is getting extremely difficult, as it is in so many different professions. We're not getting the advanced licensed EMS personnel that we really need to help with our calls on our third ambulance. So just to make sure everybody's up to speed, we have 3 ambulances. We only staff 2 of them. We have a full-time crew on 2 of our primary ambulances. And then the way we use our third one, it's there so that it can fill in when one of the other 2 units is down for maintenance. But we use it increasingly more as an actual response unit to multiple calls or calls that require multiple ambulances. And we have been able to do that with per diem staff over the years. What this differential will do is allow us to schedule and pay a reasonable rate for a higher level EMS provider for that one shift, which we hope we will be able to increase our revenues with that third ambulance by being able to go to more calls, bill more of those out, and recoup a lot of the costs that we're asking to add there. And that's just the way it's required, just because of the way that we've had difficulty recruiting folks for the per diem program. Next slide, Liam, please. Revenue challenges. I think you probably noticed there is a dip in our revenues this year. There's 2 revenue lines that show decreases. One of them is in our EMS revenues. And I thought it would be appropriate to explain why. There's really 3 reasons there. We had some unanticipated bad debt write-offs that I hadn't forecasted. There's a reduction in volume. So when COVID first hit, we really went through a period of several months where folks were just petrified to go to the hospital. And so the normal calls that we get for breathing difficulties and medical problems really backed off. If folks weren't on their deathbed, they didn't call for a number of months and weeks. That certainly had impacted, because we have always, when I do my budget each year, we calculate the amount of revenues that we're able to allocate to the general fund to help offset the EMS service. And historically, our average number of calls has been going up, and it's been a pretty straightforward calculation to gauge how much we're going to bring in and how much we can take out of the general fund. COVID really significantly reduced some of those revenues. We were down about $133,000 from what I had projected. And then the third reason is the intentional use of some reserve fund balance. And once again, so everybody understands how this works, all of our EMS revenues come into a reserve account, and each year we budget the amount that comes out of that reserve account to offset taxes through the general fund transfer. The balance in that account, we don't want it to get too high, but we have always historically tried to leave a reasonable amount in there so that when it came time to replace an ambulance or to buy a significantly expensive piece of equipment like a defibrillator or stretchers and those types of big ticket items, we could do it without having to borrow the money for it. In 2017 and 18, our balance had increased to a point where we had a little bit more in there than we normally carry. And it was right at the time where we had made some investments in staffing. So we intentionally budgeted more in general fund transfer than we were bringing in to help get that balance down and to help offset the cost of some of those staffing initiatives. And that is, that kind of came to roost this year along with these other two that got us to the point where we feel that we need to make a little reduction in the revenue forecast this year so that we don't run that revenue account into the red. We think this is a temporary thing, and I'm confident that our volume will once again get back to where it is. If today is any indication, we've had a tremendous day with 3 and 4 simultaneous calls all at once, both first thing this morning at shift change and again later this afternoon, where every single truck in town was out on 3 different simultaneous calls at once. The second revenue challenge was we did lose some rental income from the 14 Saukle Street property. Just for the public edification, in 2009, we ended up buying a single family home next to North Scarborough Station. The folks that owned it were a longtime Scarborough family, and the husband was a 50-year veteran of the fire department, and he passed, and his wife sold the property to move into a smaller place. And at the time, the town decided it was a good investment to make because it was a budding property to this fire station. And we've always, in the long-range plan, looked at North Scarborough Station as a potential place for expansion. With the growth in South Gorham, the growth in that section of Westbrook that abuts North Scarborough, and in our growth in that area, it seemed like, before any of the 3 communities of Scarborough, Gorham, and Westbrook would be in a position to expand their EMS coverage, or any one of us could individually do it, it might make sense to do something on a regional basis up there. And so because of that, and because we were able to buy the property at a reasonable price, we did make that investment. And since that time, we have been renting the property. For the first several years, it was fire department employees that was great because it provided a affordable workplace housing option for folks, and gave us staffing right next door for our call force. And for the first several years, that's how it went. We did end up at a point where there weren't any fire department members interested in the rentals, so we did rent it to some folks from the general public. And then earlier this fiscal year, the last tenant moved out. And at that time, we decided it was time to evaluate the adequacy of that building and what it would take to really get it up to speed to continue renting. And the code office, Liam and I did an evaluation, and we really decided that the investment we need to make in this relatively old structure is more than the return on investment from rental income would be, and that we should stop renting it rather than make those necessary improvements. We did keep it this winter so that the thought was, back when COVID was really bad, that it may give us an opportunity if we needed to isolate some folks. So we did keep it through the summer, but we are looking to either raise it or do something this summer to dispose of the property. Next slide, please. So opportunities in terms of moving towards the budget goal. I think there are some additional revenue opportunities. One of the things that we're looking at is the new federal stimulus. As I know you are aware, we're still waiting for the final rules on what that can be used for, but Our understanding is there may be some funding available for lost EMS revenues, and I think we are able to demonstrate that and hope that we can tap into some of those funds. We're also working with Liam. We are in the middle of contract negotiations with our union, and we're hoping that there's an opportunity there to offset some of the collective bargaining costs that we are currently negotiating. And then the third thing is I have proposed a couple of adjustments to the fee schedule. Two of those are in EMS billing revenues, and I submitted a memo to the clerk's office that goes into the details of those and why. And the third is to increase our personnel labor rate that we bill to reimburse for the overtime when we have to hire firefighters to do an outside detail. The rate that we had in there is, I think, was last updated in 2013. So it had gotten to the point where we weren't recouping all of the cost, including benefits, that we were expending. So I wanted to get that up to a rate that was covering our costs for sure. There are also, I'm sorry, there's also a couple of opportunities for reduced expenses that I'm in the process of clarifying. We did have our full-time fire inspector and commercial code enforcement officer resigned recently, and we are filling that position with a part-time employee that's been working with us for several years. We think he's going to do a great job. We've entered into an agreement with him through the end of the calendar year to do it on a part-time basis. So there are some full-time benefit costs and some full-time salary savings over the 6 months that I'm calculating now that we'll be able to reduce. And there's also a couple of CIP projects that we've looked at that we may be able to fund from other sources that I'll be bringing forward. In terms of the budget cut impacts, impacts to services, certainly the reduced firefighter and EMT staffing resulted in some delays, not having those per diem hours during those commute times, and having to depend on the call members to respond to the stations and take the trucks. There were some delays, there's no doubt about it. We certainly have seen a reduction in staff professional development because of all the cuts that we took to the training lines. We didn't do any public and school fire safety education to speak of, or not anywhere near the programs that we have traditionally done. Part of that was because of the COVID restrictions, and part of it because of the lack of funding. And certainly we've continued to have to defer maintenance and equipment replacement during the past year, but also as it notes at the bottom, I just wanted to remind everybody that it wasn't just the cuts that were made last year, but we've been dealing with discretionary spending curtailments from FY20 as well. And the way I have to manage my budget, the real driver in my budget is overtime costs, the personnel costs. And I really don't know until the end of the fiscal year where I'm going to be on some of those key lines. So discretionary spending is such a small piece of my budget. I have to wait until the end of the fiscal year before I'm able to do any of those to make sure that I'm going to have the funds available to do it. And so for really 2 years now, we have done almost zero discretionary spending because by the time I was confident that there was any money left, there was a curtailment in place, and then the funds weren't even in the budget last fiscal year. Next slide, please. And I think that does it. So once again, happy to answer any questions.
John, you're on mute.
Okay, so I can only speak through my phone as well then. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that, Chief. Betsy, you rose your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, if you want to go, John, that's fine. I thought you weren't saying anything, so I went ahead.
Yeah, no, take it away.
Yeah, so I think you maybe answered one of my questions right at the end, Chief. And that's, if you kind of look at the actual in 2019 versus the requested budget for 2022, it's like a 19.3% increase since 2019. And I agree with you, 20 and 21. It's kind of hard to tell what those restoration numbers are because I know some of the curtailment happened in 2020 and we passed them over to 2021. But, you know, if the budget is rising, you know, say 6% each year on average, what would you say is driving that? So I think I heard you say overtime and wages are primarily what's driving that. Or, you know, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I mean, have you had to increase staff or increase calls? Or so what would you say has been the driver of the increases in the increased budget? We clearly at the end, you were saying it wasn't discretionary spending because a lot of those you're not able to do.
No, it was clearly staffing, Counselor. I created a staffing plan early in my career and we've updated it several times since. The most current version is right on our website, but we've had a staffing plan in place for some time now. Our whole industry has changed significantly from the time I joined. I joined the department in 1976. When I joined, there were 330 call members in the town of Scarborough. You literally had to wait for somebody to die to get a badge to be able to be a member of the call force in Pine Point where I lived. Today, that number is down to about 53 from 330. And over the years, back in the 80s, we instituted this day firefighter program, which, you know, really served us well in those early years. It allowed us to hire some of our own call members that would schedule days and be able to work shifts where we knew there was somebody at the station that could take that truck and at least get the truck to the scene, and then the call members from the different neighborhoods would join us.
Mm-hmm.
That program has worked fabulously well, but honestly, we've gotten to the point now where we're outgrowing it, and we've had to invest in career staff because, particularly this last year with COVID, we used to get 25 to 50 applications every time we did a semi-annual hiring for per diems. The last, I think, Liam, we've done 3 of them in the last 4 months, I think, and I don't think we've had more than 8 applicants in each one of those 3 processes. A lot of it is there's so much more competition. We started the day firefighter program in Scarborough in the 80s, and it's been copied by every community around and all across the state now because it was a mechanism for some of these small towns to be able to do just what they were facing the same things that we faced 25 years ago. They're starting to face now because our community has grown so. So we put together a comprehensive staffing plan, and we have made investments in career staff over the last several years. And that's the bulk of what's driving those costs.
Yeah, I think that's really important for people to understand because it's very expensive to provide, like you say, the career staff, and a lot of towns are switching, you know, from. And I don't know, we don't have the same volunteerism that we have, but a lot of towns are facing that, you know, where it's just going to be a lot more expensive. And then there's a lot more requirements that people that have to be met. And then it seems like there's even for each level that you go, there's still more, it takes more to hire, I mean, to even train for the lowest level of EMT now, doesn't it? Like a lot more.
Does. Yeah, the hours continue to increase, and it's a trend that's been years in the making. It's
right.
Just starting to get worse and worse. And because of the growth, the rapid growth in our town, we're, you know, certainly seeing it more than some other communities.
Right. Yeah. I was looking back over your staffing plan the other day, and it's quite helpful if people haven't seen it in a while. It's definitely worth going through. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chief, when was the last time we bought an ambulance?
We are due next fiscal year. So we had we've gone through an evolution of how we do that, Counselor. We used to have a plan with our vendor where we would replace one every year and trade it in after 3 years and get 50% of the cost back. And for a number of years, that really worked well for us. Our crews were in new equipment all the time. We had 0 maintenance costs to speak of because almost everything was covered under warranty except for an occasional set of tires. And we really were able to make that work in a cost-effective manner for some time. Over the last 10 years, the cost of ambulance started to get so high that I really had to take a look at the feasibility of that and to make sure that we were getting the best bang for our buck. And approximately, 10 years ago now, I guess, we decided that that no longer was going to work, that we had to keep our ambulances longer than that. And we went through a process where we kept them for 5 years, rechassied the box, and replaced them after 10 years. So the ones that we're at now, the first one that we went through that round of 3 rechassings is coming up for complete replacement next fiscal year. And then there's a gap.
Because you're funding it from a reserve account when that does come up?
That's the plan, and that's actually one of the reasons why I reduced the revenue line this year. I wanted to make sure that there was going to be some balance that we would be able to use for that when the time comes. Once again, whether that's going to work this time or not is really dependent on how call volumes and EMS revenues come in over the next 12 months. But that is the goal.
Thank you. I had one more quickly. You identified quite a few opportunities to close the gap. Do you have any ballpark at what those might total at the end of the day?
Yeah, I do. I haven't got them all down pat yet, but give me just 1 second here.
Sure.
Between the fire prevention office and, like I said, I'm looking at a couple of the CIP projects. I think we'll be somewhere around $100,000 in things that were directly tied to the tax. The CIP were appropriated projects that will have a direct impact.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm just curious, Chief, if you could talk a little bit about how this year has been different, maybe in terms of demand for services, because I just imagine with more people at home, there's probably more home fires and more things that you guys might have to respond to. So can you just kind of share a little bit about how this year has been different and what are you thinking next year might look like, hopefully, if people are, going back into the office and hopefully, not being home quite as much?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I don't know that that things have been an awful lot different. They were different in terms of the call volume. Early in 2020, the call volume really significantly dropped off because 2/3 of what we do is EMS, and there was some significant fear there. But it really has come back roaring. I mentioned at the beginning of this today. Today has just been another one of those examples. 3 simultaneous calls just before 8 o'clock this morning, where every single unit in town, every station, every truck was out at 3 different incidents at the same time, totally unrelated. But that is something that happens more and more often now. Ambulance 3, we use it as a spare, but it is used more and more regularly and is out there all the time. I think the big thing that's changed, or the big effect this year, has been to our people. I'll tell you, our folks have done a tremendous job this year with all of the stress that COVID has brought. Our folks didn't get an opportunity to have a short work week. They've come here and worked their full 42 hours on average every single week. They've had to go to calls where they knew that there was positive, COVID symptoms. They had to put their full PPE on. They had to worry about whether they were bringing any of that stuff home with them to their families and their loved ones. So there has been a tremendous amount of stress, anxiety within our troops. And I'll tell you, to a fault, they've all come through it very, very well. But it has been an extremely challenging year for our personnel.
You're on mute, John. Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
Sorry. I'm going to get caught on that a lot today, I think. With the code enforcement officer moving on, that's it. We only have one for commercial activity in town, and they're also the fire.
So let me explain. It's a great question, John, and let me explain for the public as well. So this position started back, I think Jim started in 2013, it was a joint position with the code enforcement, with the planning department and the code enforcement office to begin with. We had a need, we have always had part-time fire inspectors. And they had moved on to other things, and we needed to hire somebody. And we wanted to hire a full-time person to specialize in fire prevention, inspections, and also help with the commercial code enforcement because of all the growth that was going on in our community. So we started that as a joint position with Dan Bacon in his office. I funded half of it in my budget and he did in his. We ran it that year for the first several years. And it really worked well because now instead of the fire department doing a review on a set of plans and giving an applicant a certain set of directions, and then they'd go over to the planning office and the code enforcement guy would look at the plans and he may have a different interpretation. And it created some conflict in that we weren't delivering the best of customer service. When we hired Jim, we were able to really streamline that process. And Jim he had his fire prevention certifications, but he was also a certified code enforcement officer. And so he kind of specialized at the code office in doing the reviews and everything from soup to nuts. So it was one person contact. When an applicant or a developer came in, he was speaking to Jim about everything that had to do with code enforcement and fire prevention. All the information was the same. All of the follow-ups he did himself, backed up by the other code officers naturally. But it really worked well. And then how many years ago now, Liam? 5 maybe, or almost 5, we transferred Jim full-time into my position and hired a part-timer to help out in the code enforcement office. Jim was recruited from another department and left earlier this year. Thankfully, the fellow that we've moved into this trial period is a captain in the Portland Fire Department. He's been a per diem employee for me for 20 years here. Well-known, well-respected, great mannerism and great with public customer service. He is short in his commercial code enforcement certifications, but he's going to work on those. So in the meantime, during this transition, while we evaluate whether this is going to work or if we need to come back in 6 months and look at filling Jim's position on a full-time basis, we've met with the code folks and we're going to work together on our reviews and do the best we can to get through and see how this transition period works.
So kind of stepping it back to before Jim came on, you'll be focused on fire and then they'll be focused on the code aspects.
Right. They'll issue the permits over there instead of one person being able to do it all during this interim period until we can get John certified in the code enforcement aspect.
Yeah, if I could, part of the motivation is we think there's a very strong chance that this might work long term, so it's worth trying. Secondarily, this is really a unicorn type position. It's highly specialized. There's only a handful of folks that have the credentials, and so the likelihood of us putting a recruitment out there and finding that person is really, really challenging. So we're trying to work with what we have and hope for the best here.
Great. I think you covered the questions that I had, John.
Yeah, I just have one more question, and it's a follow-up to something you shared earlier, Chief. So you said, today was kind of an anomaly, having everything out at one time, and maybe that's occurring more at a more recurring frequency. So I guess my question is, at what point do you see us needing to make a significant investment in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years in the department to make sure that we can keep up with the demand, so we don't run into a situation where, say this morning, there was a 4th call and we just didn't have the people or the resources to meet the need. So just curious from your lens, is that a risk that we're going to be seeing soon, or do you feel pretty confident that we're in good shape?
It's a difficult question to answer. We are stretched. And I think the biggest thing that I'm seeing, and I know Liam is seeing this in every department, is recruitment has just become a real challenge, not only for the per diems that I spoke about earlier, but even for our career personnel. There is so much competition now. especially for those with paramedic licenses, that it's just becoming a tremendous challenge. We've done extremely well, even though our numbers have been small in our application processes. We really believe that to be a good fit in Scarborough, you have to have the interpersonal skills. You can teach anybody to do paramedic work, but you need good fits to make it work within your team and to deliver the level of customer service that we're known for and that I demand, frankly. And we've been very fortunate, even though the number of applicants is down, the team that we've been able to assemble and retain is just an extremely good group that does great work every day. So our staffing plan calls for additional full-time staff each year for some more years. I did not ask for any more this year, knowing that we had to pick up those stranded costs from last year and knowing that we were coming out of this pandemic and that there were going to be significant budget challenges. But you can certainly expect that going forward, there will be additional requests because frankly, at some point, we are at the point where this per diem program is getting to be unmanageable and we're going to need to start converting those into career positions where that is the employee's main job. It's not, I have to stay at my other job because I got forced for overtime or those types of things. We really need to invest in folks that are dedicated and their primary responsibility is Scarborough.
John, I just follow up on that. Just please appreciate the fire service is really built on a strong foundation of mutual aid as well. So that scenario where that fourth or fifth call comes in, the potential is always there. We would never be able to afford to provide for that worst case scenario, nor can any other community. So there's reliance on that mutual aid system to back each other up. And Scarborough has a very strong integral role in this region, providing service when needed, and it's reciprocal. So that's the backstop for that sort of anomaly.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that.
Go ahead, Betsy.
Chief, I was, fortunate enough to get a tour when I first came on, and but memory is escaping me here. So we do have an internship program, right, where we house interns. So how would you say that's paying off in terms of you get an intern who stays with the town long term and becomes a paramedic? I mean, it's a long way from internship to paramedic, but how would you say that has paid off for us?
It's a fantastic program. Scarborough and South Portland Gorham started that 35 years ago now, and it's just a phenomenal relationship with the Southern Maine Community College. We now have grown the program. We have 15 slots here in Scarborough. The program overall, I believe, are up to 90 something slots with 18 departments or something like that. Those numbers might not be 100%, but it really has been an outstanding feeder program for us. The way it works is kids that are graduating from high school and want to apply to the fire science or the paramedic program at Southern Maine Community College actually apply, go through an oral interview in front of firefighters. They have to submit a resume, and it's intended to mimic a regular job application. They're selected into the program. They move into the stations. They actually live in our stations in exchange for helping to run the emergency calls rent-free. They pay their own tuition through the college, and then the college, they get their training and their academics. And then with us, we get a trained responder who is sleeping right there on the station and is able to join the on-duty crews and respond to calls. Generally, a student, it's a 2-year program for the fire science portion, and then a lot of the students will stay for an additional 2 years and get their paramedic license on top of that. And we've actually done some things to change the curriculum around at the college to make it easier to get there, to be job ready in less time than that. So we've had just a tremendous amount of success. We've had graduates of the program. We're close to 300 graduates of the program now that have come through Scarborough's portion of this. We've got career firefighters in New York, Boston, sergeant of the state fire marshal's office, and we have personally hired dozens of them here over the years. I've got one of my captains started here, 20 years ago, and still doing a great job. So it's been a tremendous feeder program, and we'd be lost without it. It's kind of the backbone of our call for listening.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other questions. Give my gratitude and thanks to your staff for really helping pull through this year. I know that it's been certainly a challenge for everybody, but I think the frontline police, fire, and EMT workers have really taken the brunt of it and been a shining star for Scarborough this year. So thank you.
Well, thank you for saying that, and I certainly will pass it along, John.
Thank you. And with that, I had advised the school department, I know that some of them are on, but I don't think everybody is, to sign on at 5:30. So why don't we take a 14-minute recess? I'll try to get connected with one device and finish up our review for the day.
Yeah.
We'll
Thank you,
see everybody
Chief.
back.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Can you hear me, Liam?
I can. You sound great. Good.
You know what? Zoom is smart enough to know if you're connected on multiple devices. That's why I was muting my computer.
Yeah.
It was driving me nuts, but anyway. Now I know.
So let's see. I don't know who from the school department needs to come in. I know Kate does. So Kate, I'm going to promote you to panelist, I think.
Kate and Sandy anyways. I'm assuming Diane and Sarah as well. And then I'll let them add whoever they want.
So let's see.
Okay.
Who do you need to come in?
Hi, guys. Yeah, Sarah has asked if you could promote her and Leanne and Kristen. That's our finance committee. And Sandy and Diane and I are here. Sandy's going to have to drop, Diane's going to have to drop out for another meeting. She's got a conflict, so we may lose her, but she can be in the beginning, I think.
Okay. And then let's see.
Kristen.
So, oh, there's Leanne. Okay. Hi, Leanne. All right.
We just want to make this screen really crowded.
Okay. So is that, let's see. I'm sorry. Diane. I'll move
Kristen Turner, I believe, as well.
All right. I'll shut off my camera anyway, so that'll make it slightly less crowded.
Okay.
Is it all right if I grab our slideshow and bring that up at this point?
All right, go for it.
Yeah. So we're back. We're now, it's 5:30. We're going to start with the school department review. And it looks like Kate is ready to go. So I'll let you have it.
So I'll drive the slides, and Sarah, if you want to say a couple words before we head in there, I'm happy to keep on trucking here.
No, I mean, the outline or what we have planned to cover is, I think, in line with what the other departments have reviewed. I touched base with John yesterday, I think it was, and just kind of shared with him what we were planning to cover off. And he said that sounded good. So, and I, you know, there's a lot of other materials, and I'm sure Kate will touch on this as well, that are available in a more detailed version in the budget book, or in various other materials that we can share if there's follow-up questions as well, or more detail required.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did want to say that a lot of this material is going to look familiar to anyone who's been tagging along with us since the school board's first reading. But I gather that we're likely to have a slightly different audience as well. And so we didn't want to leave things out. But as Sarah says, there's a lot of material that we won't dive into just because it's already available in other places. So I guess I'll just head in. So starting off with the idea that our budget development focus was a little bit different this year than what we had been used to in the past, because it was all kind of framed in the COVID environment, and also in reaction in some ways to the budget that we built for this current year that we were in, FY21. So we were looking for a couple of key factors. You know, this was kind of our board's directive to us. What resources do we need to put into our budget to keep our current programs and services, to ensure a safe and healthy school environment, and to address enrollment projections, SEL needs, and learning recovery? And then a second question was asked that was very similar to what Town Council Finance Committee requested from the departments. You know, are there things that we have deferred in FY21 that will have an impact, and what might those impacts be? I'm sorry, these transitions are so dramatic. I usually just click. Well, you know, take 2 deep breaths while we watch the slides roll up. So obviously, transition from hybrid school, which we are currently doing and have been doing this year, to in-person learning has changed our perspective just a little bit. because things are not business as usual. Bringing kids back into an in-person learning environment after they've had a year away is going to raise some challenges. And you see some of those thoughts that we have here. The other piece that we've struggled with quite a bit in our budget development this year has been our enrollment projections, and adding to the excitement and confusion around space and how many kids can you put safely in a room and how many adults can you have in that room. We also have the problem or the challenge that our enrollment projections, which have been spot on for the past 4 years, are now, I don't want to say garbage because that's not a very nice word, but they're not all that useful right now because COVID has really changed our enrollment, not just in person, but remote, and kids choosing other options and families choosing other options. And it's an odd change because the high school and middle school are actually above projections. And K-5, the K-2 schools in Wentworth, are way below projections. So again, a little bit of a struggle, a little bit of a challenge to figure out, okay, what are the numbers going to be like when we actually return to whatever school is going to look like next year. This kind of reminds me a little bit about what Chief Thurlow was saying, is that most of our budget, as everyone knows, because we talk about it all the time, is in salaries, wages, and benefits, personnel costs. And so this slide tells us that 74% of our total budget increase at the school board's first reading is made up of people costs. This is a slide that's a page out of our budget book that helps folks see, and there's a number grid below this in the book if people want to take a look. But it kind of tells people where the money goes. This is our general fund operating budget, and these are the areas in which the tax dollars are spent. And again, you can see the bulk goes to salaries, wages, and benefits, and debt services right up there, and then everything else just sort of tags along in those nice little pretty colored bits. So some of the things that the Leadership Council brought forward when we started discussing the budget proposals were pretty common across the district, and we went out and had some meetings with staff, and we had some surveys and some questionnaires and our usual budget process. And these are some of the themes that school leaders and other staff members have identified all across the district as we work to put our budget together. And I won't read you the slides, but this document I think will be available. We can certainly post it, or it can be part of the presentation. So one of the cost drivers that we have in the FY22 budget, I think you've heard quite a bit from other town departments, is restoration of positions that were eliminated when we were building the FY21 operating budget. And, of course, a year ago, things were pretty exciting, a little bit scary, and we made some budget adjustments accordingly. And so what we've been living with in FY21 hasn't necessarily helped us get through this year effectively. And these are the 4 priority areas that our leaders have identified where they would really want to have these positions back in order to provide good services for our students. And I will take a minute just to talk about what these positions are. An instructional coach position at Wentworth School and the middle school. These are positions we've had in place since 2012. So one of the questions that was asked was, were these new proposals for FY21 that were deferred? No, these were actually positions that have been in place for many years that were removed or eliminated. So instructional coaches in this current year, we've had an enormous amount of burden on our teachers trying to adapt curriculum and programming to our current learning model. And we're going to have those same kind of challenges bringing kids back into school in the fall and sort of reworking curriculum to address learning recovery. And those instructional coach positions are really critical in that work. We have one athletic trainer full-time on payroll. And then we contract with Maine Medical Partners for an assistant trainer who works, on an hourly basis on a contract. And our sort of baseline number for those services was 20,000, and we cut it by 10,000. So obviously athletic trainer services, those are essential services for student athletes. If we have more than one athletic contest going on at a given time, it's a tough job for one athletic trainer to do all of that. The athletics and activities secretary, again, we've had an athletics and activities secretary as long as I've worked here, which is about 20 years right now. And restoring that position at a halftime level will at least get us back to ensuring that the office is open for regular hours. They can assist students during the school day. And there's also a lot of management compliance documentation that has to be taken care of, that's kind of falling by the wayside with the management of the actual events going on. The central office receptionist, again, a position that we've had forever. We eliminated that position, again, trying to stay away a little bit from the classroom and trying to make sure that we were, if we were eliminating a position, that it wasn't going to directly impact students. But in many ways, this position has impacted students and staff and families and the community, because other central office support staff have had to step in and sit at the front desk and cover the phones. And we've got a robocall thing on the phone now, or what do you call that, answering machine thing, which I dislike intensely. And I wish that humans would pick up the phone, which we mostly do during the day. But, not to be flip about it, but this is a critical communication point for our community. And it has caused other folks here in central office to have to set aside work that's important to be able to do these clerical tasks.
So Kate, could I ask a couple of questions on this slide just because it's so detailed, and then
Sure.
when we're done. So the what's listed here, like the 168 and the 42, is that all in, or is that just salary? So is that salary benefit?
Oh, no, that's the full cost.
So these are all in. And
Salary
then,
benefit, mean PERS, payroll
that's everything.
taxes. Yeah, and
And
of
then-
course it's an estimate.
Did these represent layoffs, or were these some of the, so were people laid off, or were people were you had an extra position somewhere else that you didn't fund? So did,
A little bit of a combination. The athletics and activities secretary was a layoff. The central office receptionist was laid off.
it was a layoff? Okay.
One of the instructional coaches was laid off. The other, they actually split a position. So when they went into the classroom. But yeah, actual humans walked away on this.
Okay, thank you.
Betsy, if I can just add to that, I think your question was a good one, and maybe something that we should add an asterisk somewhere. But anytime you see a cost associated to a role, it includes the salary but benefits as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, good question. Thank you. So here on this slide, we have the ask for actual added positions. These are not positions we've had before. We have a high school halftime social worker who's retiring this year. And with that opportunity for turnover, and with the increasing need for mental health services at our high school right now, which have been significant, we're proposing to make that halftime position a 1.0, a full-time position. And in doing so, we'll achieve a little bit of savings in turnover as well, because that person who's retiring is a veteran, and there's likely to be some cost savings with a new hire. The second bullet here is for 2 special services ed techs. And my bullet says it's due to the increase of the age limit for eligibility. And not to go into a really long story about that, but the Department of Education this year extended the time frame for which students can receive special education services. So a child who's at the high school right now who has an IEP has an additional 2 years of education available to them, which is awesome, but it also means that we don't have that natural progression where a student might graduate or move on to other services in the adult world and free up an ed tech for us to use for incoming students. I'll keep going, but you all can just jump in if you because Betsy's right, it is complicated. So this is our summary page that talks about in sort of categories what we've got in our budget proposal that's passed by the for first reading by the school board. So the first column is where it says retains. These are COVID related funding that was included in the FY21 budget. The 2 school nurses, 1 special education teacher was actually funded out of grant funds this year, but we want to retain that position, again, for COVID learning recovery for the most part. And the 23 bus driver positions, that comes up in one of the questions that was asked by the council, and we'll get to that at some point later in this presentation, but we have 23 bus driver positions is actually our level services number. It's the number that we have had in the past. And last year, when we were building the FY21 budget, we proposed eliminating 3 of those positions because they were empty and we had been unable to fill them. They had been, folks had resigned or retired and we were unable to fill the positions. So when it came time for us to find a place to save some money in our budget, we said, okay, well, let's just say we'll probably not be able to fill those positions in a COVID environment anyway, and we'll just do without them. And then down the road a little bit, we put those positions back under the COVID related funding bucket because we knew that we were going to be transporting kids with space needs and that having those extra positions might be really absolutely super helpful. I will tell you now that we haven't been able to fill those positions. So unfortunately, we're actually where we would be had we not budgeted for them, and we'll have surplus instead. But we do think that the 23 positions is the right number for level services.
Okay, can I ask a question?
Go for it.
So knowing that next year there still might be like space restrictions and challenges, and you mentioned 23 is really for level services. Is that low considering, there still might be needs for spacing if all kids are back in the fall to have more buses or more bus drivers potentially?
I think it's probably, well, let me say this. If we could get more than that, it would be wonderful. I don't think it's realistic to believe that we will be able to fill more than 23 positions, John, because we actually have 5 open positions right now and another retirement that's on the horizon. So I think ideally it would be grand to have a huge quantity of drivers at the ready and we could put more buses on the road. But I think from a practical standpoint, I don't think we'll fill more than 23. Okay. I hope we fill the 23.
Thank you.
Sure. So the next column is, again, talking about that COVID related money. It was $550,000. What we're not asking for, again, because these are, we're acknowledging that we've already achieved some of the changes that we need to make, and we can go back to normal funding levels. The restores, we just walked through that, restores column. And the final one where we're adding, we walked through that one as well. But on this page, I'm showing 5 classroom teachers with an asterisk. And the asterisk is that in our first reading budget, in our budget proposal, there are 5 classroom teacher positions included. That's what the school board passed on March 18th. And then not very long after that, we got the numbers on our new stimulus money, the ARPA is how we're referring to it. There's too many acronyms in all of this. But we will be able to take those 5 teacher positions out of the FY22 budget proposal and use grant funds to pay for them. it's a little bit of a complicated shift because the new ESSER 3 money is allowing us to free up the ESSER 2 money that we had retained for other purposes. And we can answer questions about that. I think there's a lot of questions about the federal stuff, but there's also a lot of answers.
Yeah. So I think on that, the the one of the most commonly asked question is, is it going to kind of become, level services, or are they going to be hired as temps, like a lot of us at work in different environment, not municipal, which works differently, but we might, if there's a special need, you might hire a contractor or a temp or something like that, but you don't actually increase your count in terms of your baseline. Is it, so how those teachers come on board, under what provisions?
So a short answer to that is that a teacher can be on a 1-year contract, and we would treat that teacher just like a normal teacher, because hiring someone with a salary and benefits, you're assuming that you're going to get someone who's an experienced and certified teacher. That's what you need.
Right.
So hiring them with a normal salary and benefits, but putting it out there that it's a 1-year position and that it's grant funded. And there's a requirement for those folks to sign off that they know that they're grant funded.
Okay.
And so we anticipate that the need for the 12 positions that we haven't even included in this budget proposal, that will be for 1 year only. That's only due to space restrictions.
Right.
The 5 positions are a little bit more complicated because there's some enrollment projections in there, some wonders about who's all going to come back. And that's why they actually landed in that first reading budget proposal, because the 5 positions are more likely to continue on. But for this year, having the grant funds available to pay for those folks allows us to have the room to breathe to decide whether that's level services or not. And the other thing to know about teacher positions is, bless their hearts, they are called probationary for 2 years. And so, first of all, you have a 1-year contract, and coming in that at the end of that year, you need to apply for something else. And then secondly, probationary teachers aren't guaranteed a job in the second year at all. So I'll keep going, and I think we'll come to some more of those questions that we might be able to fill in some blanks as well.
Yeah, that was helpful.
So this chart just basically shows you what the operating budgets look like at first reading. And this is the 3 operating funds. It doesn't include capital. We can talk about capital, and there's some material linked in here that you'll see later on. But this is where our budget stood at first reading. General fund operating, adult education, school nutrition. And the general fund operating budget is the K-12 budget that the voters vote on. All right, I'm having a little trouble with my screen here, so bear with me 1 second here. Maybe I should look at my other screen, John. And the next thing that's going to happen is that my computer wants to restart. It's been trying to reboot me all night. So I'm like, no, snooze, please stop.
It's that kind of day, Kate.
It is that
They're gonna
day.
throw everything at us.
It is bad tech day. That's the label. So items in motion is the label that we put on budget elements that we are not sure about at first reading and that we know we're going to take a closer look at before second reading. So it can be personnel cost projections such as Anthem health insurance, dental insurance, work comp insurance, property casualty insurance, things that come to us from the outside, but the quotes aren't in yet. Workers' compensation. So in this chart, what you're seeing is a reduction proposed to the school budget. General fund and adult ed operating are included in this. On the expenditure side, $534,000. And this link, I think, is live. So if folks are able to click into this I'm not sure if this is shared out to you guys. I'll ask, maybe Liam does that. But the chart is linked in, and I guess I'll just take a quick sidebar and show you what that looks like. So this is the beginning budget at first reading. These are all the little bitty things that we've changed up and down. And this is the expenditure adjustments. And then, all right, am I back at slides on the screen here? Okay. Also linked into this page is our FY21 third quarter financials, a draft that I provided to the Finance Committee earlier this week, and they're reviewing that. I think you got some numbers on that from Ruth as well, the whole school town picture for third quarter. But this also has some high level projections of where we're going to land, I think, as of June 30 of 2021. So that goes to the next slide, which is about adding revenue. And in this slide, what you see us doing is adjusting a little bit on adult ed and then increasing the use of fund balance. And I'm guessing that Councillor Clucci, being the clever person that he is, was probably most interested in year-end fund balance, with the idea that if there's extra, it would be a great way to help support the FY22 budget. And I fully agree with him.
I won't rebut that.
No
Thank
argument
you.
there.
No.
Okay, so here again, you're seeing an increase to revenues on this page. And then the last item here is about capital improvements. And again, one of our sort of charges was to take a look at the capital budget, show priorities, and see whether there was anything that could be deferred or reduced. So what I've linked in here, and again, I will probably just be able to share this out to you guys after the meeting. What I've linked in here is the first reading budget proposal, which has a lot of detail in it about why we're doing it, what the project is, and why it's a priority for us. And it also has a little priority sort of checklist on the right side. And then the budget book narrative also includes a lot of explanation as to why those projects are in there. And in many cases, some of them are labeled with, yes, we deferred them from FY21, and so now we're coming back around to them. So with all of that said, we looked at CIP. Actually, this is kind of hot off the presses because I met with Todd Jepson just after I met with the Finance Committee. That was yesterday, and we went through the proposal and identified some items that we felt could be deferred without causing any great risk. The first element on this page is just some cost estimates that we've had to be able to refine some pricing. And then the non-critical projects, energy improvements and interior finishes. Energy improvements is replacing light fixtures for the most part with LEDs, what do we call those? Oh dear, high efficiency LEDs, there we go. And interior finishes is painting. And instead of doing those projects as large scale, we're gonna do this entire wing of this entire school, we can piece away at them, which is what we generally do anyway. So if a light fixture breaks, we will replace it with a more efficient light fixture. If a room needs to be repainted, we'll repaint that room, but we won't do the whole wing. And these seem like frivolous things, but these are things that actually save us money in the long run and keeps the buildings in good repair. But we feel like we can defer those for this year. Security camera replacement, again, if they break, we'll have enough money in our operating budget to do replacement, but we won't do a wholesale replacement based on age or, based on expected life. And the last item is Quentin Drive paving, and I'm not sure if you all saw the detail of that in our budget proposal, but Quentin Drive, if y'all have gone down there at any rate of speed, you can take out the bottom of your car pretty easily. We've actually had unfortunate citizens do that from time to time. But there's a big dip in it, and then it's broken and cracked on either side. And it's been something that the school's been talking about with Public Works for quite some time. And so ultimately that road is on the school campus, and therefore, you know, in our interesting divisions of ownership, it's considered school property. So we put that into our budget. But at this point, I mean, that's a nice to have. And what we think we'll do is we did preserve $20,000 of the original estimate to be able to repair the big divot that's between Wentworth and the library that's causing some problems. And then apart from that, would just leave it the way that it is. So I'm going to go back to my budget worksheet here with all the fancy colors. And I'm going to go down to the bottom here and show you this is the detail on the CIP changes. And again, these are all proposed changes for the school board second reading, but you know, these are things that everybody's on board with. So if you look at the summary right here in the green at the bottom of the page, you'll see I've captured the reduction of expenditures, the increase of non-tax revenues, and the reduction of CIP, which isn't in this chart, but the overall impact is a reduction to the school tax request of 1.1 million. Here.
Wow.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You guys have already
You
done
guys
a
came
lot of
through.
work.
We heard the charge, man. We're there for you.
No questions. I think we're about good. Is that right?
So there is a page in my slide deck that's all the Q&A that we received from you guys. And then apart from that, we just have another summary page at the end of this that shows what I just was showing to you on the screen. And this just gives you a picture of what that does to the overall operating budget. I will say one more thing about the capital budget, which is that I know that Tom and Ruth have been looking at the funding sources for the capital budget. So there's some moving pieces there as well, where something that might have been appropriated in the original proposal might be able to be bonded. And I know Ruth's been talking with the bond council and trying to figure out, you know, what's an appropriate funding source. So there may be some shifting there as well. So all we really focused on was the expenditure side, because that's the part that we're, you know, in charge of.
Just for what it's worth, the projects that you've detailed there are all proposed to be appropriated. So we can, that does go directly to the bottom line.
Tom, I'm thinking we've actually made some good progress today between fire and now the school department with closing the gap. I think it might be appropriate to start a running total. I'm wondering if staff can help us with that. So that, you know, when we start the next meeting, we have a better understanding of where we're at, given some of the moving pieces.
Sure.
Nice job, Kate.
I did it all by myself. Now you guys know that we have an amazing team here, so we're pulling. Do you want to? I look at the time; it's 6 o'clock. Do you want to tackle more questions from this presentation? Do you want to dive into some of the questions that you asked us ahead of time, or how do you want to deal with that?
Well, let's open it up. We generally just have a conversation about things that you haven't already been resolved or answered. You know, one question in my mind is I know that the state revenue forecast came out yesterday, and it is extremely favorable. And I know that there's some potential movement on revenue sharing, which we might find out as soon as today, where it passed in the House already, but they're contemplating bumping it up to 5%, the distribution, which could have a significant impact on what we get. Have you noticed any movement on the school general purpose aid, or do you anticipate anything?
I guess I don't, and it's odd because you know, Tom and I talked a little bit about this, and that the fact that it looked like more funding was being appropriated for schools. But I was on a business managers meeting with the Department of Ed Finance office 2 weeks ago now, and I asked that question, you know, what's going on with GPA, and the answer was what you see is what you get. The good news is they're not going to make it smaller. The bad news is they're not going to make it bigger either. So I'm not sure that I fully understand that. I didn't follow up with questions, but short answer is no.
Chances are yours wouldn't move anyways because your minimum.
Because of
is
the
bigger.
minimum receivership. Yeah, exactly.
Kate, would you mind stop sharing screen just so we can
Oh,
see others
absolutely.
collected?
John and Betsy, do you have any questions for the school department? Go ahead, John.
Yeah. So knowing you guys are still working on your plans for the fall, and Kate, you just, found a good chunk of budget to go down. Do you guys feel pretty confident that how those plans are shaping up, that the budget you're bringing forward is going to meet those needs? Or do you anticipate any other changes over the next month as those plans come together?
I could start by saying, I think the great news that we've had in the past 2 weeks is the fact that we're not going to have to rent space. Because it was giving me a lot of heartburn to try to figure out, we're going to get about $1 million, just under $1 million in ESSER 3 funds. And to figure out how to rent space and also hire the staff and do the infrastructure work that would take, depending on the nature of the place that we were looking at, we looked at a bunch of different places. That would have taken about double the $1 million. And so the fact that we can make things work in our existing buildings, and the only extra that we're going to have to deal with for the most part is the staffing. I don't have that heartburn anymore. I think we can pull it off. And Diane might be able to speak to that too.
Yeah, sure. I think that we are really well positioned as we look ahead to a full return for fall. I think that bringing Harriman on board just to have a second look at our space projections and to really do a deep dive into each of our facilities was super helpful. And I had reported that information out at the last school board meeting. And so the class sizes that fit following the CDC guidelines was the information that we utilized to project the number of teachers that we would need. And Sandy and Todd Jepson and I have gone around and met with each of the building principals. We did walkthroughs at their sites to talk about how some spaces may need to be repurposed next year for the purpose of making sure that we can bring all of our kids in. And we are very thankful to have received ESSER funds, this third round of ESSER funds, which is specifically targeted for districts to help with that full return to school for students. So we feel like it is very doable. And to Kate's point, the fact that we can make it work within our own facilities is huge. Todd had gone and done a look at some available spaces around, and those were definitely going to be very costly. And so I think that if we had to have gone off-site, we would have a major conundrum because we would really be trying to figure out and balance, the cost of leasing space and the cost of additional staff. Now we can feel very confident that we're just really looking at, what is that number of staff that we need to bring on board for next year while these requirements are still in place.
Just as a reminder too, I think the saving grace with all of this was the distancing between students. As you know, when we started off in the fall, they had to be 6 feet apart. And just recently they've changed that to go to 3 feet. So as we look at that for next year, that really made a difference. And as Diane said, the Harriman's report was sort of a win-win for us. So we're in good shape.
Great, thank you for answering that. Just I guess another kind of follow-up question, again, just related to the fall, that I'm hoping you guys can talk a little bit about more. So, at first I was thinking that the teacher increases that were needed was more for safety because of the space, but listening to you guys at the beginning talk about the learning loss, I'm just curious if you can talk a little bit for the public about how those smaller class sizes are going to be critical to closing that learning loss gap.
I think, the research will show that the smaller the classroom, the more individualized instruction you can provide for students. And just the square footage alone, trying to make it so it's manageable in the classroom for the classroom teacher, those are key components as we look at good instruction. And I think, again, it's trying to find the affordability to do this, and at the same time provide a high quality education is sort of the ingredients that you're trying to look at. So I think this year was tough. It really was. And we did have some students with the social emotional concerns, as well as the learning going backwards in some situations. We really want to be prepared to make sure everybody can come in a positive way and make the gains that they need. So.
Great. And my last question is related to the turf field, which I know is going to be coming forward again. Can you guys talk a little bit? Because what I've heard anecdotally is that safety is now a real issue. Can you talk a little bit about safety and where we are, and at what point is it so unsafe that we won't be able to use that field anymore?
Probably have to get Tom to help me out on this one.
Yeah, I mean, we do hire third-party inspectors to come in and do those inspections. There's actual tests that they perform. I have the results of the most recent test. I know we have one scheduled for July to really prepare ourselves and assure ourselves that it'll be ready for play for fall sports. But this is at end of life. And so I fully expect that for it to be playable for this fall, we'll need to make some emergency repairs. We really can't do much to improve the base, underneath the turf without the full reconstruction. So its days are numbered, there's no question. We're really reaching critical phase at this point. Personally, I think we'll be lucky to get through the fall season.
I think, John, that the recommendation was that we have it tested and remediated before each season now, just to be sure. Yeah. Obviously not using it in the winter, but yeah, Tom's right. Its days are numbered.
So the intent would be for this, if it's successful through the budget process, to go to the voters in the fall. And ideally, I may be speaking a bit out of school, but construction as soon as next spring. There's a question as to what to do with spring sports and have it, the new replaced field, I believe, in position for fall of 22. Is that right, Kate?
Yes, fall of 22.
Yeah.
It may well be, John, I just should say the athletic director I know is making arrangements perhaps for relocating spring sports altogether to enable the construction work to happen. So I think we're really looking at fall sports, one more season, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Great. And lastly, just a comment, today has kind of been our I guess our local heroes day for budget, because we had fire, police, and now the schools. And so I just want to thank the schools for everything they've been doing this past year. I have two kids who go to Eight Corners, and they've been virtual this year. And the teachers have been just absolutely phenomenal. I think they've even served a little bit as, counselors for me and my wife when we've had to reach out to them to help figure out how to deal with our two kids. So thank you to the schools for everything you guys have done this past year. And I look forward to hopefully getting them back in school next year.
Go ahead, Betsy.
Yeah, on that theme, we said budget goodbye to Chief Moulton, and I think this will be your last budget season with us, Dr. Prince, and you probably never imagined you came out of retirement, jumped into Scarborough to help us, and you ended up in the middle of a pandemic and unprecedented school action. So you could have avoided all that had you just stayed retired, but it was, you could do that. So I just want to say thank you, and for the stability you gave us, in that transition period and longer, and wish you well.
Thank you. I've enjoyed my time here, and it has been a challenge, but it's all about my team. I've got a wonderful team here, and it took everybody to pitch in, and we really, I feel, have made great gains. So thank you, Betsy.
You're welcome. So I did have a few questions, and if there's anything it's like, well, you're not prepared to answer or whatever, that's fine. We can take it up later. It's not a big deal. But I was wondering what was driving the 27% increase in IT, because I know we had to do a lot of IT this year, but my understanding was, that was one area we were successfully able to use a lot of the COVID money for. So I was kind of hoping to see IT like take a breather for a year and then maybe come back, but instead there's a fairly large increase in there for IT. Do you have any comments on what those drivers are at the IT increases?
I believe that was one of the questions that I saw in our Q&A.
I didn't get all the way through those, so my apologies. I could just read that, but if you want to answer it for the public.
No, that's absolutely fine. But what I was going to say is I might just pop that open and have a look at what
you said.
what we said. It must have been clever, right? So let's just see. I'm just on another screen here, Betsy, for a second. I know that a piece of it is personnel and a piece of it is tech stuff. Okay, so in that answer, the Q&A document, there's a description of what's included in that line. So about $100,000 of the increase is in personnel costs. So one of the positions that was cut, and remember, we're shared town school, so it was cut from the town's staff, but paid by the school in FY21, was a field tech position, which is actually, it was cut at the end of FY20 and has now been rehired now at the end of FY21 as a deferred position. So that's back in our budget. And then the other piece, there really isn't a lot in purchasing equipment. Obviously, you're absolutely correct that we have equipment. We were blessed to have just mountains of tech equipment available to us through the CARES Act funds. But most of it is in software and repairs and maintenance for that equipment. So there's an increase to that budget line, budget category of about another $100,000 split between those two things, where we've added some online services and programs. And it'll remain to be seen whether those continue throughout past FY22, because some of those things are in support of hybrid learning and we're going back to in-person learning. But some of those things are supports that we've learned and programs and new things that we've learned are really effective. So we're hanging on to them at this point.
Okay, great. Well, another, I guess I'll kind of use as a theme instead of like going through line items, but I did notice like custodial and transportation and not a little bit in some of the other areas that the benefits seem to be up quite a bit this year, but really up over 2020 and even 2019. Is there something that's driving benefits? Were there additional benefits offered across the board, or did one group get caught up with another group, or is that even a question that makes sense to you? But like benefits seem like, so if I see like staff salaries seem to have gone up, 3% or whatever, benefits seem to be going up at a higher rate than that. So I'll just leave that in general instead of trying to go for different line items. But do you have any comments on that, Kate?
Well, it's an interesting point. Bearing in mind that you are looking at the first reading budget right now, that's what's published.
Mm-hmm.
The likelihood is that you're going to see quite a reduction in those lines at second reading, because we're going to be taking out the Anthem reduction, which is over $400,000. When we went to build the budget for first reading, we were projecting a 6% increase,
okay.
Which was, and when we do that, we use an average of prior years, trying to hit, what's that sweet spot where the increase is going to be. And Anthem bless their hearts, recognizing the world that we're in right now. First, they told us they couldn't give us any idea what the increases were going to be because COVID was weird and everything was really hard for them. And then they said, we're not going to raise your rates at all. So we have a 0% increase, which is awesome. But I think in second reading, you'll see those numbers come down quite a bit.
Okay.
And then the only other thing that really drives benefits, we haven't really had big differences in contractual obligations as far as benefits are concerned. We pretty much stayed stable with that. But then, of course, staff turnover can be a big driver because there's such a huge difference between the employer cost of like a single plan versus a family plan.
Okay.
That it can really skew a benefit line, especially if there's only a couple of people in it.
Okay, yeah, that was one of my questions, is kind of what drove so much variability of it too. So, okay,
Yeah,
you answered that
yeah.
without me asking.
And
that.
and
Okay.
the odd thing about the school budget, and this is driven by the need of the Department of Education to have, super granular data. But we can have we have accounts in Munis that have literally one person in them, or two people, or five people, where the town is much more cumulative. They don't have to break everything out into tiny little cost centers. So in a situation like that, you get turnover and you have somebody who didn't take any health insurance, and then somebody else comes in, takes their place and takes family coverage.
Okay.
That's where you can see some really crazy changes in percents.
Okay, great, thanks. So I just have one last question. It's a couple of areas that look like, they had some fairly large drivers. I mean, we know the health services and kind of what's going on there, but overall administration was up 8.56% and library up 8.17%. So in your opinion, what is kind of the drivers of those two areas?
So system administration, did you say, or?
Oh, hang on.
There's system administration and school administration. One is central office and one is the
System administration. Yeah.
Yeah, system administration, I did have that on the question list, and one driver there is the restoration of the central office receptionist position. That accounts for 42,000 of that. The other big change I noticed in that department, system administration, is where the superintendent salaries and benefits are. That's where mine are, the support staff here. But it's also a lot of the operating costs of the district. So one other line that I noticed that was a big increase was the unemployment costs, and that's up about a little over 30,000. So if you take those two big changes and you drop them out, and then we'll have a little bit of Anthem change in there as well. We'll have a little bit of reduction because that big $400,000 reduction will be spread off all of these other cost centers. You get to about a 3% increase, 2.9% increase without those two big factors.
Okay, thanks. So what about library services?
Library, I'd have to take a look at. And my guess would be library is super concentrated with people. There's very little stuff in the library. Library budget. They have a contracted services line where they pay for things like the program that allows them to do book circulation, and they buy books, and then there's people. So my guess is it would probably be driven by salaries and benefits, because if you take a 2 or 3% increase in salaries, COLAs, steps, and then you add a 6% increase in health insurance, that's probably going to create a little bump there for you.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
So I just had a couple of things, and then I think we'll be able to wrap up. I got an email today about a back to 5 days a week rally that's taking place soon. And I've been working under the impression that this budget gets us back to 5 days in person next year. And I've been working under the assumption that that's what you've been driving to all along. Can you just reaffirm that so that everybody's clear that, the school budget is targeted to get us back to 5 days a week next year?
Thank you, John. Yeah, that's the intent. We are ready to go full-time next year. I reported to the board a couple of weeks ago about that. If anybody has questions, they can reach out to us. But we will be full-time. Again, the Harriman's report helped provide the data so that we can get everybody into the classrooms. It will be tight, but we'll be able to do that. And we're looking forward to being full-time, and that's the goal. So.
John, I think that we got an email just to add to what Sandy said from one of the sponsors of the rally, and I think the audience was more the state and the governor than the Scarborough School District directly as well.
Okay, all right, good.
So just to be clear on that, John, or Sandy, I should say, so there's no intention, and there never has been, to get back in person this spring still?
Full-time?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
The board had 8 options. I'm thinking it was a month and a half ago, Tom, and they voted on the option that we're currently in now with a little increase in time. Again, during that time, we were still under the distancing requirement where students had to be 6 feet apart from each other.
Mm-hmm.
And just recently, that's gone to 3 feet. So that has helped us to make the transition for September.
Excellent. You know, it's funny looking back where we were a few years ago. I always picture the schools as a slow-moving monolith. It's you know, it's a highly complex, large organization, a lot of different moving pieces, right? There's federal pieces, state pieces, and locally, and then all of a sudden let's blow it all up. And I think that's what happened this year. And really, you guys have responded and adapted in a remarkable way. You know, I have 3 kids in school, one at Wentworth, the middle school and high school. So I got a little bit of a flavor of how different administrations have responded. And I don't think that you've missed a beat, really. We've got some really impressive and talented teachers that are innovative. And I guess so now that we've established the back to 5, is there anything that we've learned this year through that process of transformation that we're going to try to stick with next year?
It's a great question, John. And I can tell you, we've been so busy as an administrative team that I think that would be a really good retreat for us to reflect on the year and look forward. But I can tell you, just from my experience and my observation, the opportunities to provide remote learning, it's not the optimum, but we've made huge gains just internally of people getting more skillful on how to do that component. So there are pieces like that by accidental, given the COVID times, we've learned a lot, and we'll continue to take those experiences and build them into the future. So.
Go ahead, Betsy.
So John, I did have one last question, because every time I think I understand it, I don't quite. So Kate, you kind of explained the 5 positions, you know, are in the budget right now. And so then the grant money is, you know, so it's going to be 2 buckets. Here's the 5 positions, here's the grant money, and hopefully it's like a zero sum game. The 12 positions are not going to appear in the budget at all. They'll just be grant money, or they're going to appear in the budget with an offsetting grant line. What is that going to look like on the 12?
So federal grant funds aren't included in our budget process. They're included in our financials, and they're audited, and you know, we've reported you know, tons and tons of information on the CARES Act grant funds that we received this past year. Normally our grant funds are small. You know, we might get 600,000 for special education and 100,000 for other things, and that's it. So there's obviously a lot more interest in them, but they are not treated any differently from those smaller grant funds that we have every year. So they won't appear in our operating budget with an offset, because that's not the way they work. They have to be kept separate in a separate fund in the financial systems and reporting.
Okay, thank you.
But I'm happy to share piles of paper. I can show you my
Bet.
those are my binders over there. That's like federal grant land.
And Kate, we have to go through a special audit process because we receive those grant funds, right?
We do. And actually this coming year will be really exciting. I think we talked about that. Well, I didn't talk about it, but I was listening as you were talking about the audit coming up. And our auditors will have to do an individual audit on that grant because of the size of it. So they'll have to go through and pull all kinds of documentation and make sure that all our ducks are in a row. But I think more importantly, we'll try to report out in the same way that we've done on the CARES Act stuff. So if folks haven't looked at the budget book yet, in the executive summary of the school department's budget book, there's 3 or 4 pages about all the things that we bought with the CARES Act money, where that all went to. And there's been some communications out from the school board with a couple of different spreadsheets showing where everything went, what the budget was. And we're more than happy to share the details of that. It's just not folded into the operating budget by the way the financial reporting is required.
And have we received all of our reimbursements? Because I was talking to a school member from another district, and it got pretty tight for them. They were spending the money, but they were not getting reimbursed very quickly. Have we been reimbursed?
It was getting ugly for some of our smaller districts. And again, I'm on these business manager meetings every week, and there were some folks that were really getting pinched, because you're right, that you have to spend the money first with a federal grant and then you get reimbursed. And if the reimbursement is delayed, that can be really painful. We're in good shape right now. We've got almost all of CARES CRF1, they call it, down to about $50,000 of that first $2.5 million. And on CRF2, which came a little bit later, we've still got about $500,000 to go, but you put in an invoice by the month with a ton of documentation. So it takes them a little while to process it, but I don't think, we've been hurting in some of the ways that some smaller districts have.
And just out of curiosity, did you pick up all that workload, Kate?
Well, yes, I did.
Wow. Because I heard
other duties as a son.
Documentation, and if you even like why did you want erasers, or very, very detailed.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the sun much.
I bet.
I just have a question while we're on the kind of the topic of opening up, and I don't know if you guys would know the answer to this, or if I'm just thinking too far down the road. But I know, I was watching the news this morning, and they were talking about vaccinations for children and saying that it's still unclear when that's likely going to happen. Would schools typically serve as a center for child vaccinations, and would those nurses that you're asking for, would they play a role potentially in helping vaccinate the children in the schools if and when a vaccine becomes available for children?
I'll answer in a very vague way, because it's not my area of expertise, and Diane, I think, had to get off the call, but I know that there have been lots of conversations with the state, with Department of Education, and then all of the healthcare providers about when vaccines become available, who would be able to deliver those. I would say right off the bat that our nurses are pretty out straight, so I'm not sure that they personally would be able to run a clinic, but obviously we would definitely be able to facilitate one. And Tom will agree with me. I think that public safety has been super forthcoming in wanting to help us out with that, because they're all trained in how to give the vaccine, and they've been doing it for their own folks. And in fact, they reached out to us trying to help us with teachers, but they're trying to keep everybody in their lane at the state level. But, I think that if there's an all-out opportunity for kids to be vaccinated, then we're going to be in the mix, because we were, strong players in trying to get the staff vaccinated.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the school department? No, you guys should be proud of what you've been able to accomplish this year, both the school board and school department together. You've been faced with some really extreme challenges, and I'm grateful for all the work and how you've all come through for us. And also, I'm grateful that you found $1.2 million to help close the gap voluntarily. It wasn't confrontational, so it's letting the process unfold. So you put us in a better position than we started the day. With that, are there any members of the public that would like to comment?
John, I did receive a public comment via email. that
Okay.
the individual asked me to read into the record. You ready for me to go for that?
Go for it.
So it's from Larry Hartwell. His comment is, each year the town council publicly states something like a goal of 3% mill rate increase. And every year, like this year, the town manager and superintendent present budgets nowhere near this target. The town council thanks them and allows them to walk away, left to the respective finance committee to deal with it. Why do town council finance committee people at least object to this and ask for the leaders to go back and bring the budget that was requested? So I think that's the question. And they completes with a comment. That's what the superintendent and town manager are hired to do, put together budgets as requested by the town council. And I'm not sure if Mr. Hartwell has anything to add or if I didn't do the tone justice, but I don't see any other public comments.
Okay. Thank you for that, Mr. Hartwell. With no other public comments, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Colette, can you help?
I can. Counselor Clucci,
Yes.
Counselor Glystein,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
motion passes. Thank you.
Hey, have a great night, everybody.
All
Thank
right,
you.
Thank you.
Guys, very much.